Greetings, this is Reverend Yue McCormick of True Vow Temple. In this presentation I will be talking about the Hoto-ge, the verses from the Stupa of Treasures chapter of the Lotus Sutra, which is often recited in the morning and evening devotional practice and other services of Nichiren Buddhism following the chanting of the Odaimoku. An important part of Nichiren Shu's services is the practice of sandan, or extolling. This refers to the practice of reciting a verse or passage extolling the virtues of chanting the Lotus Sutra in the Odaimoku to arouse our faith and reverence. The sandan verses and passages are reflections upon what a rare and precious opportunity it is to encounter and put into practice the Buddha Dharma. Some sandan are for recital before chanting passages from the Lotus Sutra, while others, such as the Hoto-ge, or verses from the Stupa of Treasures, follow the chanting of the sutra in the Odaimoku. Because the Hoto-ge is being used as a sandan and not as part of the practice of sutra recitation, it is not accompanied by the moksho or mokugyo, which are percussion instruments. There is a particular cadence that is used when reciting the Hoto-ge that is unlike that used when chanting the Hobenpan or Jigage. The reason for this is because it is an attempt to mimic the sound of Nichiren Shonen's chanting of these verses when he was taken away by boat from Kamakura to be exiled to the Izu Peninsula on May 12, 1261. As this picture depicts, Nichiren stood in the boat and chanted so that his followers on the shore could hear him. His voice rose and fell along with the rising and falling of the waves. To commemorate this event, an undulating beat is used when chanting the Hoto-ge. The Hoto-ge, or verses from the Stupa of Treasures, are an excerpt from the verse half of chapter 11, beholding the Stupa of Treasures of the Lotus Sutra. In this chapter, a Stupa of Treasures springs up from the earth and hangs in the sky before Shakyamuni Buddha. A loud voice is heard from within the stupa verifying the truth of Shakyamuni Buddha's teaching. Excellent, excellent! You, Shakyamuni Buddha, the world-honored one, have expounded to this great multitude the sutra, the lotus flower of the wonderful Dharma, the great wisdom of equality, the Dharma for bodhisattvas, the Dharma upheld by the Buddhas. So it is, so it is. What you, Shakyamuni Buddha, the world-honored one, have expounded is all true. On behalf of the four assemblies, Great Eloquence Bodhisattva asks Shakyamuni Buddha about the stupa and the voice within it. The Buddha tells the assembly that inside the stupa is enshrined the perfect body of Many Treasures Buddha, who made a vow that even after his final nirvana, he would appear to testify to the truth of the Lotus Sutra if anyone should teach it after his passing. Great Eloquence Bodhisattva then asks to see Many Treasures Buddha. Since Many Treasures Buddha had also made a vow that he would allow his stupa to be opened to reveal his body if the Buddha who teaches the Lotus Sutra recalls all his emanation Buddhas of the 10 directions, Shakyamuni Buddha proceeds to do this. He purifies the Saha world, recalls all his emanations, ascends into the sky, and opens the Stupa of Treasures. Then, at the invitation of Many Treasures Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha enters the stupa himself. Shakyamuni Buddha then uses his supernatural power to raise the entire assembly into the sky as well. This is the beginning of the assembly in space, which continues for several chapters and concludes in chapter 22, Transmission. Shakyamuni Buddha then makes 3 proclamations, urging those in the 4 assemblies to expound the Lotus Sutra in the Saha world. As part of the 3rd proclamation, the Buddha explains the comparative difficulty of teaching the Lotus Sutra after his final nirvana. After explaining the difficulties of expounding the Lotus Sutra in the latter age, the Buddha says, "Good men, who will keep and receive this sutra and read and recite it after my extinction, make a vow before me to do this." He then concludes with the verses that we call the Hoto-ge. Ho is treasure, To is stupa, and Ge is a character used to translate the Sanskrit word gata, which are verses used in Buddhist sutras. Let's now look closely at these verses wherein the Buddha describes how glad he will be if anyone can keep the sutra in the latter age, and proceeds to praise them. The verses begin with Shikyo nanji nyaku zanji sha gasoku kangi shobutsu yakunen, which means, "This sutra is difficult to keep. If someone can keep it even for a moment, I shall rejoice, and so will all the other Buddhas." It continues, Nyoze shinen shobutsu sho tan zeisoku yu myo zeisoku shojin, which means, people such as these will be praised by all the Buddhas, as people of valor, as people of endeavor. Then, Zeimyo jikai gyozu da sha sokui shitoku mujo butsudo, which means, they are called observers of the precepts and practitioners of the Dhuta. They will quickly obtain the unsurpassed Buddha way. Next, No orai se doku jishi kyo zeishen bushi jujun zenji, which means, in the future, those who read and keep this sutra will be the true children of the Buddha, abiding in a state of purity and good. Next, Butsu metsu dogo no gego gi zeisho tenin seiken shigen, which means, after the Buddha's extinction, anyone who understands its meaning shall be regarded by all gods and humans as the eyes of the world. And finally we have Okui se no shuyu satsui sai tenin kaio kuyo, which means, if in this fearful world they can expound it for even a moment, then all gods and humans should make offerings to them. Nichiren Shu taught that in the latter age of degeneration, upholding the Lotus Sutra single-mindedly may be called observing the precepts in the Dhuta, which are Buddhist ascetic practices. In the Shugo Kokoran, treatise on protecting the nation, he cited the Hoto-ge and then commented, in the latter age of degeneration, we do not uphold the precepts of the 40 or more years before the Lotus Sutra. Only by upholding the Lotus Sutra do we observe the precepts. We should probably connect this idea of upholding the Lotus Sutra being equated with the observance of the precepts with what is called the passage of natural transfer from Kanjin Hanzansho, the contemplation of the mind and the focus of devotion, where Nichiren Shu states the following about the Daimoku. The two dharmas of the causal practices and virtuous effects of Shakyamuni, the world-honored one, are perfectly contained in the 5 characters in the title of the Sutra of the Lotus Flower of the Wonderful Dharma. When we accept and uphold these 5 characters, the merits of these causes and effects are naturally transferred to us. This passage is sometimes recited before the chanting of Daimoku in Nichiren Shu services. It expresses the key principles of Nichiren Shonin's teaching that those who faithfully accept and uphold the Daimoku will naturally receive all the merits of the causes and effects of the eternal Shakyamuni Buddha. This would of course include the merit of observing the precepts set forth by the Buddha and practicing the Dhuta, or ascetic practices, allowed by the Buddha. Does this mean that we do not personally need to make good causes and obtain merit through our own efforts? Based on all the Gosho in which Nichiren Shonin advises his followers to act ethically and show restraint in their conduct and consideration for others, often in conformity to Confucian ideals as well as Buddhist principles, I do not believe Nichiren Shonin would have condoned antinomianism, the view that if one is spiritually saved, one does not need to concern oneself with morality or self-restraint. I think he would have been quite upset by any such idea. I think that what Nichiren Shonin had in mind was that by practicing the Odaimoku, we would realize in ourselves the spirit of the Lotus Sutra's respect for all people, which is the Buddha's respect for all people, and that in doing so, we would naturally conform to the true spirit of all the precepts. As he explained in Shishin Gohansho, the 4 depths of faith and the 5 stages of practice. Muddy water has no mind, but it still catches the moon's reflection and naturally becomes lucid. Plants and trees catch the rain to blossom, but can we say they do this deliberately? The 5 characters Myoho, Renge, and Kyo are not the text of the sutra, nor a mere explanation. Rather, they are the sole intent of the whole sutra. Beginners may practice this without knowing the heart of the Lotus Sutra, but their practice will naturally harmonize with its intention. Given that through our practice of the Odaimoku we shall conform to the spiritual intent of the Lotus Sutra, and therefore with the true spirit of all the precepts in the Dhuta or ascetic practices, what are these practices whose true spirit we shall realize? Let's first look at kai, or precepts. The ideogram, kai, can also be translated as precept or precepts, because the character can be taken as either singular or plural. It can also be translated as morality. There are many different sets of precepts in Buddhism. There are the 5 precepts for a layman or laywoman, the 10 precepts for novices, the 6 precepts for postulants, and the binding rules for monks and nuns. In Mahayana Buddhism, bodhisattva practice includes the three categories of pure precepts: the precepts for maintaining restraint, the precepts that encompass all good deeds, and the precepts for benefiting sentient beings. In East Asian Mahayana Buddhism, one especially influential set of precepts for bodhisattvas is the 10 major precepts and the 48 minor precepts of the Brahma's Net Sutra. If we look at these precepts in terms of the 6 lower realms of birth and death, we will see that they align with different attitudes towards virtuous or wholesome conduct. The hell dwellers are amoral and break the precepts primarily out of paranoia and hatred. The hungry ghosts are likewise amoral and break the precepts primarily out of greed and thoughtless craving for their desired objects. Animals act instinctively with no sense of morality and break the precepts primarily out of ignorance. Asuras, or fighting demons, are said in the Tiantai teachings to actually be observers of the precepts, but they do so out of self-righteousness and pride. Humans are said to at least be upholders of the 5 precepts. The gods are said to uphold the 10 virtuous precepts, also called the 10 courses of wholesome conduct, as well as practicing charity, cultivating meditation, and in particular cultivating the 4 divine abodes of loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity towards all beings. What are the 5 precepts as taught in Buddhism and given to lay people formally in other schools of Buddhism? It is taught that by at least following these 5 precepts, one will be able to make the causes to be reborn in the human realm again. These 5 are: not to kill, not to take what is not given, not to commit sexual misconduct, not to lie, and not to consume intoxicants. What are the 10 virtuous precepts, which are also known as the 10 courses of wholesome conduct? It is taught that by following these precepts, which require more self-restraint regarding language and one's views and attitudes, and therefore more mindfulness and self-reflection, that one will be able to make the cause to be reborn in the heavenly realms. These 10 are: not to kill, not to take what is not given, not to commit sexual misconduct, not to lie, not to engage in malicious speech, not to engage in harsh speech, not to engage in idle chatter, not to fall into covetousness, not to fall into ill will, and not to fall into wrong views. Also notice that if one is following these precepts, one will also be practicing the Noble Eightfold Path, which is the 4th Noble Truth. Precepts 1 through 3 are right action, precepts 4 through 7 are right speech, precepts 8 and 9 are right intention, and precept 10 is related to right view. Following these precepts would also be part of right effort. If we look at these precepts in terms of the 4 higher realms of liberation, we will see that they align with different attitudes towards virtuous or wholesome conduct. The voice hearers, who are the Buddha's monastic disciples, uphold the monastic precepts. The cause knowers may be considered privately awakened ones, in which case they are awakened on their own and do not follow any institutional precepts. Or they may be considered hermits within the Buddha Dharma, who would then uphold the monastic precepts. Now the monastic precepts were not set forth immediately or all at once, though the 10 novice precepts are set forth early on. Shariputra once asked the Buddha to give the Sangha monastic rules, but the Buddha refused. He told Shariputra that he would only set forth rules when conditions required it, in order to resolve specific situations wherein monastics did not behave as arhats should behave. By the end of the Buddha's life, hundreds of situations had arisen, and so there came to be many monastic precepts. Bodhisattvas may appear at any time and any place, and so they would follow the precepts of their given time and culture, provided that selfless compassion can be cultivated and expressed. The Buddhas do not follow any precepts, but they are the source of the precepts and the model of conduct that the precepts point to. We will not go into the full monastic precepts, but the 10 novice precepts will provide a general feeling for the kind of lifestyle expected of monastics. These are: not to kill, not to take what is not given, not to break chastity, not to lie, not to consume intoxicants, not to eat at improper times, not to wear perfume or bodily adornments, not to indulge in singing and dancing, not to sleep on high and luxurious beds, and not to handle gold and silver. As we can see, they prescribe a life that is chaste and simple, if not austere. The 10 major precepts for bodhisattvas from the Brahmanet Sutra that were conferred at the Mahayana precept platform at Mount Hiei were and still are given to both householders and monastics in East Asia. Anyone who wishes to follow the way of a bodhisattva can take them. These are: not to kill, not to take what is not given, not to engage in sexual misconduct, not to lie, not to sell intoxicants, not to speak of the faults of those in the 4 assemblies, which would mean the monks and nuns, the laymen and laywomen, not to praise oneself and disparage others, not to abuse others through stinginess, not to bear grudges and refuse to accept apologies, and not to slander the 3 treasures. As we can see, they emphasize not harming others or causing conflict, particularly within the Sangha. In the Brahmanet Sutra, the Buddha says of these precepts, "The precepts of the radiant Vajra treasure are the source of all Buddhas, the origin of all bodhisattvas, and the seed of Buddha nature." Vajra in this passage has also been translated as adamantine or diamond, diamond cutter, or thunderbolt. Later on, the precepts of the radiant diamond treasure came to be called the diamond chalice precept, with the character for precept being taken as singular and the character for vessel or chalice being added in. Based on a passage from the Kyōgyō Gosho, Teaching, Practice, and Realization, attributed to Nichiren Shu, we find the radiant Vajra precepts understood to be a diamond chalice precept associated with the Daimoku. The passage reads, "The core realization of Myoho Renge Kyo, the main gate of the Lotus Sutra, contains all the merits of the practices and virtues of all the Buddhas of the past, present, and future, which manifests as the 5 characters. How could these 5 characters not contain the merits of all precepts? Once the practitioner has this comprehensive, wonderful precept, even if he wants to destroy it, he cannot. This has been called the diamond chalice precept." The term diamond chalice precept is not used in Nichiren Shu Jukai ceremonies, or precept bestowing ceremonies, but the term wonderful precept is. The wonderful precept therefore means to uphold the Odaimoku, which contains the merits of all the precepts. Now let us look at the meaning of Dhuta, which is translated with the 2 characters that are pronounced Zuda in Sino-Japanese. The Sanskrit term Dhuta can be translated as shaken off. So Dhuta refers to ascetic practices sanctioned by Shakyamuni Buddha to eliminate or shake off defilements and release practitioners from attachment to clothing, food, and dwellings. According to the treatise on the 10 Ground Sutra, the 12 Dhuta or ascetic disciplines sanctioned by Shakyamuni Buddha are: 1. Living in the forest away from the village. 2. Only begging for food and not accepting invitations to dine with householders. 3. Begging from door to door without discriminating between homes. Eating only 1 meal a day. Eating only 1 full bowl. Not drinking juice or sap after the noon meal. Wearing only robes patched together from discarded rags instead of accepting new cloth. Keeping only 3 robes. Residing in cemeteries. Residing under a tree. Residing in the open air. Sleeping while sitting up. These are the ascetic practices allowed by the Buddha. None of them were particularly severe in the Indian climate. They are not meant to all be followed at once. In fact, 10 and 11 cannot be practiced at the same time. The point of these practices was to overcome craving and physical weakness, to more quickly realize non-attachment and attain liberating insight. Just as with the precepts, the merits of these practices become part of, or are discovered to already reside, within the life of those who uphold the Odaimoku. Being credited by the Buddha with all the merits of Buddhahood because we chant the Odaimoku does not mean that we should become complacent or presumptuous. What we do matters, and it is still important to make good causes and refrain from bad causes in our daily lives. What Nichiren Shu taught was not just that we would be credited with merit, but that we would naturally become meritorious through upholding the Lotus Sutra. In the Zuiji Gosho, the sutra preached in accordance with the Buddha's own mind, he wrote, The Lotus Sutra is called the teaching according to one's own mind. Namely, it expounds the true mind of the Buddha. Since the Buddha's mind is so great, even if one does not understand the profound meaning of the sutra, one can gain innumerable merits by just reading it. Just as a mugwort among hemp plants grows straight, and a snake in a tube straightens itself, if one becomes friendly with good people, one's mind, behavior, and words will become naturally gentle. Likewise, the Buddha realizes that those who believe in the Lotus Sutra become naturally virtuous. I now bring this presentation on the verses of the Stupa of Treasures chapter of the Lotus Sutra to a close. I look forward to your questions and comments. May the merits of this talk on the Dharma extend universally to all, so that we and all living beings together accomplish the Buddha way.